Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball
with Air Sport. Watch live Pro 14 action on Air Sport this season. Visit airsport.ie.
And you're very welcome along to this edition of Monday Night Rugby. It's Richie McCormack here with you, and all of our rugby coverage, as you heard, is brought to you with Air Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland. Joined in studio by Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent. Good evening to you, Rory. And also on the line by Eddie O'Sullivan, the former Ireland head coach. Good evening, Eddie. Eddie, we've had two inter-pro matches under our belts this past weekend. Leinster's 20 points to 3 victory away to Connacht, and then Munster's 9-try annihilation of Ulster at Thomond Park, 64-7 ultimately the score. We'll start with the game at Thomond. A record-breaking result for both sides. The most points Ulster have ever conceded in a game, and the biggest margin of defeat for them as well, and achieved their highest ever score in a league game, did Munster, surpassing the 61 points they scored against Caerphilly way back in 2001. But all that said, I'm not really sure how much we can read into this in the context of Munster having to play away from home again this coming weekend.
Well, that's Munster's problem at the moment, is that, you know, the 3 home matches they've won comprehensively, the Cheetahs, the Ospreys and now Ulster. Those games are pretty meaningless, not because of anything Munster did wrong, but basically because the opposition against them. The Ospreys was a second string outfit, came to Cork, and Ulster went into that game last weekend not because they rested guys, but they had 14 injuries. A lot of their frontline was gone. Henry Speed, Louis Luddock, Luke Marshall, Stockdale, Herring, Coetzee, Best, Herbst, McCall, Reedy, Murphy, Henry, you know, it just goes on, Marty Moore. So, like, they were just a second string going in there, and that's not what Munster needed. Munster needed a decent game, because the only 2 decent games they got this year are away from home at the start of the season in Glasgow and in Cardiff, and they come up well short in both of those. So, as Johan Van Graan admitted afterwards, he's not sure where they are, and you can understand why. So it was a pretty meaningless game for Munster. You know, it's hard to look past the fact they scored 60 points, but it's hard to look past the fact also that it was especially an Ulster second string, so you can't put anything into it. And I think that is a big problem for Munster over the next 2 weeks. They really don't know where they stand. Yeah, it's a strange one. It's almost like they're going into the Leaving Cert where they're having done their mocks at this stage with Munster. They really didn't impress away from home, both those games, to Cardiff and to Glasgow. On the attacking front, like, they didn't score for an hour away from home last week. Yeah, so to get 60 points on the board is a massive boon. Keep the scoreboard ticking over as they did throughout the duration of the game of the weekend looks fantastic. But as Eddie mentioned there, like, we can't really gauge, especially given the way Leinster are playing at the moment, what kind of a performance Munster are going to need to put in a winning effort at the Aviva on Saturday.
It's impossible to know. It's impossible to gauge this form line at the start of the season. Like, teams are resting players away from home so much that the form line is so it's just impossible to get a read on anyone really. I mean, Leinster, you can see, have a consistent run of results, and the performances haven't been dipping even though they've been changing, and they're probably the only team that can go to Thomond Park and make the amount of changes that Ulster did at the weekend. You know, Ulster don't have the depth to be able to do what they did last weekend and win, but the Ospreys did that 3 weeks ago and have won their 2 subsequent games. So they threw the game in Cork effectively, won their subsequent 2 games. They're second in the table, having won 5 or 4 of the last 5 of their 5 games. So effectively, when they look back on this block of games, losing in Cork doesn't really matter. They're in a good position. If Ulster win at the weekend against Connacht on Friday night after a 6-day turnaround with, you know, a whole lot of guys you expect to come back who basically were rested last weekend, whatever injuries they had on the back of South Africa, they'll have won 4, drawn 1 and lost 1. So, you know, it was a strategic call by Dan McFarland. Whether the young players will be, seriously wounded by the fact that they've got such a shellacking, you know, it remains to be seen. Whether that will do damage to their confidence in the long term, that's the risk that he's taken. But from Munster's point of view, they've just, the Cheetahs just don't look to be anywhere near as good this year as they were last year. But the other 2 teams have sent basically dummy teams down, and they just don't know where they stand from their home form perspective. And then they get the high of that, and they carry it into an away performance that's really, really poor. And they just have to find somewhere in between this weekend. They need to be able to bring the intensity they brought last weekend. They will have effectively a full team, I'd expect, because they have a 7-day turnaround to their opener against Exeter, which is probably one of the most daunting European games any team could open with. I mean, Exeter are flying at the moment, and they nilled Munster in pre-season. So we will know a lot more about where Munster stand this Saturday. But I'd say Van Graan is slightly concerned that just not having any real read into where they are going into this game.
Eddie, there's a damning aspect to that in terms of how we view the competition, because as Rory mentioned there, Ospreys essentially, you don't want to say threw the game down at Irish Independent Park, but they did purposely send out pretty much a second string side, and there are mitigating factors for that. So ultimately, at this point of the season, you have a lot of games that essentially should have asterisks beside the result, because the result is achieved with a certain team put out on your behalf, and also you're facing a certain opposition, so you don't necessarily get a true read of where any team is at the moment, given the nature of the teams they're putting out with the look aheads to the European games, and then following on pretty closely from that, the start of the autumn campaign internationally.
Yeah, I think it's a problem for the tournament in terms of the integrity of the tournament, that we don't turn into what was the French top 14 where basically you only won your away matches and you sent a different team on the road, and the predictability of that doesn't help the spectators who are paying their money. I mean, it's great fun when your team are racking up 60 points, but when you step back from it, it's not the competition you want. It doesn't help sponsorship, it doesn't help TV. Nobody's going to sit at home and watch one team put 60 points on another unless you've skin in the game. So it's not good for the tournament, and I'm not sure what you can do about it, because coaches have picked the teams they want and the teams they think is going to serve them best to get to what is at the end of the day trying to get into the playoffs at the end of the season. And Rory's right, probably the only team in the tournament can afford to chop and change like any other team and not pay a price is Leinster. They have that much depth and talent. But I think it does affect the integrity of the tournament, and it's probably the first year we've seen it. It kind of in essence where you can almost... The worrying thing is you go to a game, you look at the two teams, they line up and you go, well, if they keep it under 50, it'll be interesting, and that was the way it was in Thomond Park last weekend. It was the way it was in Cork 2 weeks earlier, and it's not good for the tournament.
It was interesting this week that Todd Blackadder over in England basically did the same thing for Bath's away trip to Saracens, and the quote he used was, "We need to break the habit of breaking the players." And in England, they pride themselves on the fact that they play the teams play their players every week. But even there, we're seeing a coach who's come from the New Zealand system, more like the Irish system than the Premiership system. But even there, we're seeing the wholesale rotation, and a coach probably saying to himself, well, I probably won't win in Saracens anyway, so why not take this one as a week to rest the big guns and then come out and win at home next week? And for all that the fans are unhappy with the away performance, we'll win at home and I'll get them back on side and they'll be ready for Europe. I think less games is the only solution. I think Martin Anahi, the director or managing director of the Pro 14, has said that in an ideal world he would like more teams and less games, so the bigger conferences strip away some of the games within the international windows, gives a bit better place for the players to have a break. But if the Irish players are being limited to 18 to 21 games over the course of, or 17 to 21 games over the course of a season, they're not going to be able to play every week. The coaches can't pick them, and ultimately it's going to be fans saying, on a Monday when they're thinking about buying a ticket, well, hang on a second, who am I going to be watching, or what am I going to be watching? If they start staying away, that's when the place or the whole thing's going to have a problem. Or when broadcasters are conducting the bidding rights and they're trying to hype up a competition, and then they pitch up at Thomond Park and they get a really one-sided game. People will start switching off.
Ultimately, Eddie, that's what it's going to come down to, is the economics of the thing, because obviously the Pro 14 organisers have made a big hoo-ha trying to spread this thing internationally. They have brought the game and the tournaments to South Africa. There's been talk of heading west to the United States and possibly to other places in Europe as well. So obviously they want the thing to grow. The thing's not going to grow if it becomes pretty boring and a pretty turgid spectacle. And if we have games as one-sided as the one at Thomond Park this past weekend, and again, there are mitigating factors behind that, it's not going to help the tournament grow. We're talking about Leinster looking to refurbish the RDS. They're not going to get big crowds in there if they're going to be winning handily pretty much every time they turn out there. It can stagnate pretty quickly. Fewer games seems like one option. Staggering the calendar a little bit and spacing games out a little bit more in terms of player welfare, that would seem to be another one. But it is something that you would say they would need to address, and it's probably becoming evident even in this early part of the season.
Well, growing the tournament is a great idea, provided and only provided it's sustainable and meaningful. And if it's not meaningful, if you have these one-sided affairs going on right through the season, and let's not move past the fact that there are some kind of lame ducks in the tournament. It used to be the Italian teams that are the lame ducks, but they seem to pitch it up a bit better, but they seem to have been replaced by the South African teams. So you can't afford to have a tournament where you've 2 or 3, maybe 4 lame ducks in it that everyone beats up, and then in between those, other teams are resting away from home and they're getting wiped out. It's just not sustainable. So if you're going to develop the tournament, you need to develop it in terms of sustainability, because you can have more games and more teams, but if nobody's going to watch it or see it, you're just creating a bigger deficit. Like the perfect model is the NFL in America, where the 16 regular season games, and they believe that's too many. And if you look at the NFL last night, like, there was a ton of games went down to the last play practically. That's what gets people into the stadiums. Like, it's any given Sunday is the famous saying of the NFL, is that means any team can beat anybody else on any given Sunday. And that's what you need to generate in a tournament to make people come back every week. And it's a dangerous country to go into, where you have this predictability about results before they're even played. And I don't think expanding the tournament isn't the obvious answer if it's not sustainable from a financial perspective and from a competitive perspective. But I do think they need to find a way to have less games in the tournament, and those games then have to be meaningful. Every game is a full-on metal jacket game, and these kind of write-offs you get in early enough in the season. We're into the first month of the season, and we've got these games going on. It doesn't do anything for the tournament, or anything for the supporters, or anything for sponsors, or it gives you any chance of promoting a better product down the track. So I think it's a problem they have to look at. It's looming large, and it's kind of become front and centre now because of these one-sided affairs early in the season.
On the positive front for Munster from that game, and it's a weird thing to say on the positive front after they've ran in 9 tries, Albie Mathewson looks like a rather canny acquisition, playing a scrum half. The other night we saw a few fancy flicks and tricks from him, but also on top of that, he looked like he was helping that backline move with a greater pace than had previously possibly been seen in the opening couple of weeks for Munster.
Yeah, I thought he looked really good. I know he was his debut, but he has been there for 3 or 4 weeks waiting for his work permit, so he's been in amongst it. He's gotten to know the players around him, and he seemed to be barking orders, taking command. There's no, he's a former All Black who's played at Toulon. He has the pedigree anyway, and he looked the part, and he looked confident. He looked like a player who, if Munster were operating with a free hand and didn't have to seek approval from HQ, they should be giving him a 2 or 3 year deal, really, because they need someone to back up Conor Murray of that quality. Because there's games where they leave Conor Murray on for 80 minutes, where if they didn't have to dip so far below Murray's standard off the bench, that they would probably bring him off. So I thought Matheson was really good. I thought his option taking was good, and I think himself and Carberry really have he takes a bit of pressure off Carberry, which last week we saw Carberry make bad decisions under pressure, but Matheson has the skill set to take the decisions himself, to just give Joey a break and not force him to make the decision every time, which is what Conor Murray will do eventually whenever he does come back. So he looks very good. I thought Alex Wotton looked really good. He's kind of disappeared since he had a couple of bad mistakes in the Racing semi-final last year. I know he did an injury at the start of the season as well, and I thought Niall Scannell coming back, himself and Billy Holland really added a bit of grit to that pack. I think Munster always look better when Scannell's in the team. He just has that that old-fashioned hard edge that Munster rely on. I know Reece Marshall's a really good hooker, but I think Scannell's just the nuts and bolts, and he kind of ties the whole thing together. So there was really everything was positive for Munster. That's the problem. It's like what's the false positives? And they were up for it. Peter Manny was flying into everything. They would have beaten Ulster's first team the way they played. It's just they wouldn't have put 60 points on them, and I think it would have been more worthwhile for them. And if they pitch up and bring their best to the Aviva at the weekend, they're never far off Leinster, even on days when Leinster play well. So it's not a major worry. They're still one of the top teams in Europe. It's just it'd be good to see them putting their best foot forward and getting a result at the weekend, in terms of just staying in their case for the season and almost laying it out there ahead of Europe, because at the moment they're vacillating too much. Yeah,
if you're watching on any of our social streams at the moment, be sure to get your comments in at the moment. All across the season we're giving away great prizes with thanks to Heineken. Last week we gave away tickets to Leinster versus Wasps on October 12th, and this week we're giving away VIP tickets to that game as well, which includes a stadium tour on top of it. So get the comments in. We'll announce the winner at the end of the week. Rory touched on Alex Wotton there. It was great to see him grasping his opportunity with both hands, Eddie, because as you mentioned, there were a couple of mistakes last season in that semi-final to Racing, but really looked like a player brimming with confidence. Eddie?
Yeah, I think he was, he had a great season last year in terms of starting out. He was really on top of his game, great finishing, and then I think he got it into those big games, and he made a couple of mistakes, and they were pretty crucial mistakes, but He'll probably learn from that, or if he doesn't, he's going to be in trouble. But I suppose starting the season out again now with an injury and overcoming that. But again, I think he had a good day out on Saturday. That will stand him in good stead. But I think he wasn't under a lot of pressure. The real question for all these guys is, when you go next week, if you're in the Aviva Stadium and there's 50,000 people there or whatever, 35,000 people there, and you're playing against Leinster, that's when you really find out what you're at. So it was a good step forward for him, but I think he'll remember as well last year that he was in the same place at this time and didn't work out that well, and that maybe he's learned from that. But he's a great finisher, he's a great athlete. But having said that, I think he knows there's tougher tests ahead of him if he's going to be around for a while. Yeah,
another man to get in on the try-scoring action at the weekend was Joey Carberry, and he added 13 points with the boot as well. But a commanding performance from Carberry. His former Leinster coach, Stuart Lancaster, has been speaking about the now new Munster number 10 and how he's impressed so far down at Thomond Park.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good player, and certainly I think not just Joey going there, but Conor Murray not playing has meant they've probably not box kicked as much as they would have done, and they're certainly playing a more expansive style of rugby, as you can see from the Ulster performance. In fact, they showed that twice at the end of the season in the semi-final, when we played them at the RDS. So I think Munster evolve in their game, but their foundations of their game are still very, very strong. They're very, very strong defensively, they're very good at the ruck, very strong set piece, etc., etc. So I don't think the fundamentals have changed, but Joey's definitely brought something to the party, that's for sure.
Yeah, it certainly looked like one of those games that suited him, I think, to a degree at the weekend.
Yeah, it's that on the game in Cork, front football, everything going forward in front of him, armchair ride. He's a class act, and another brilliant score which he created for Wotton down the left, but Wotton the brilliant to stay in field, and then through that kind of bit of a Hail Mary, but just Carberry comes on full speed and arcs his way over, just that gliding running style. It's so good to watch. It's the game. It's this Saturday. If he plays, it's this Saturday. It's the day where they're not going forward. It's when he has to make decisions under pressure. It's the days where he has to take the decision to relieve the pressure on the players in front of him. That's where he's going to be tested, and that's where he was tested in Cardiff and was probably came up a little bit short. So again, another player who played really well on Saturday won't be getting carried away with it, because you really can't read too much into it, and I think we'll get a much better measure of where he's at this weekend. But I do think having Mathewson there helps. I think the fact that I don't think the pack will be dominated in the same way as they were in Cardiff. That was a real, and in Glasgow they were two poor outings. But I think now that they're into the business end, Munster usually find their form around this time of year. They usually are able to get it together, and I think if they even break even, he just is so dangerous. His footwork is excellent, and he looks the part in those games, and I think he will be the part. It's just this process of getting him to that place, because he hasn't played enough rugby in the position.
We'll turn to looking at Leinster's 20-3 victory away to Connacht on Saturday too. Eddie, I just want to ask with a simple question: what the hell was Dominic Robertson-McCoy thinking?
It was ridiculous. I mean, I don't know what went through his head. I don't know the guy at all, and I think Andy Friend dealt with it well after by saying that he defended the player in terms of his integrity. He said he's a good young fella and he doesn't know why he did that, but it's not his form, so you can take him at his word. But it was a moment of madness, and it was so shocking to see, because you don't see that anymore, and rightly so. It's not part of professional rugby. In the bad old days in the amateur game, there's a lot of that around, and there was no TMOs, or there was no assistant referees. There was a lot of that went on, and it was wrong. But it's so unusual to see that now in a game, and I don't know what went through his head. He was just off the bench, and he lashed out, which is crazy. But it was a straight red card, end of story. And the problem for Andy Friend now is Dominic Robertson-McCoy might not see grass again for a number of weeks after this, and they don't have to make an example of him. They just have to punish him accordingly. It's just indefensible.
We're going to be looking at a lengthy ban for Robertson-McCoy here, Rory.
I can't see anything else. I mean, I know they take into account previous records, and I don't recall him really having any brushes with the law in the past. He's not a player who's played a huge amount of rugby since he came over from New Zealand. Beanham's fairly fixed at number one there, but I mean, the game was over. It was garbage time. It was such a irresponsible and reckless thing to do. It was silly, And he's only he cost his team, but the team had already lost the game. He's really just cost himself because he's a player who needs opportunities, and now he's taking himself out of the frame. And you're talking probably Christmas before he's back on the pitch again.
Yeah, and Eddie, it's one of those things that Connacht can't necessarily suffer any of those lapses, whether it's players missing. They can't suffer lapses in defence like they did on a couple of occasions on Saturday that allowed firstly Gary Ringrose to cross the line, then also to concede try from the maul as well. It's just simple stuff like that for Connacht really cost them on Saturday.
Well, I think they actually played quite well. The problem they had in the first half is they were playing into the wind and they had to hold the ball, and they did it pretty well actually. And for that reason, I think that in the first half, in the second half, they played. Right, lads, can we cut that? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Hello.
Go on ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, can we cut that out? Can I start again?
Keep going, Eddie, we're live.
All right. Run the question at me again. I just lost my train of thought there.
No problem. It's just defensive lapses and small things like that really cost Connacht at the weekend.
Yeah, I think basically for Connacht, in the first half, they had the wind at their backs and they played sensibly. They played position, they played territory, and they dominated position and territory. But the problem was when they had to run with the ball, they couldn't basically break down a pretty good Leinster defence, so they didn't have much penetration. And I still think at half-time going in they were pretty happy, but what they needed to do was stay in the game. And in the second half they would have had to hold on to the ball, but I think the hammer blow came was a really soft try to give. And now I know Ringrose is a great feat in that, but he cut back and he beat about 4 or 5 players to go under the sticks in the 41st minute. I think that was the end of the game there and then. I think, had they been able to hang in there a bit longer, because at the end of the day, Leinster wouldn't have been happy at half-time. They created a lot of chances in the first half. They got into the outside channels, and they had good opportunities and kind of blew them, through loose passes. And even in the second half, when they got their nose ahead, there was I think the second try came from Cronin. It was 56 minutes. There was still, over 20 minutes left, and they never really scored after that. So, they'd be probably looking at that and saying, why they didn't drive home their advantage? But I think, Connacht played well, but they never looked like winning the game. I think they would have had to stay in the game and keep it tight for, say, 70 minutes and then maybe nick it. But I thought Leinster looked comfortable really throughout, particularly when they got into the outside channel. But what will annoy, I suppose, Leo Cullen and Stuart Lancaster is that they had actually created some really good chances, particularly in the first half, and butchered them, particularly James Lowe a few times, just, through loose passes and stuff. But having said that, I don't think Connacht would be too disappointed having lost because, as Andy Friend said, look, this we know what it's like now to play a championship team, and that's true.
Yeah, on the Connacht front as well, we heard this evening Rory Connacht and the IRFU aware of media reports, they say, concerning Sevu Reece and his recent court appearance. We are currently seeking to clarify information around the situation prior to commenting further on the matter. Reece went through a court case recently back home. He was discharged without conviction on an assault charge against his partner down there. It's another question mark over squad numbers that essentially Connacht can't afford really to have, I guess, at this time of the season. Yeah,
I've been watching Sevu Reece the last couple of weeks in the Mitre Town Cup, the New Zealand provincial competition, and he's been lighting it up. He looks like a really talented player, and reading through the details of that I've seen it. I mean, this only came to light just before we went on air, but it looks kind of like it's going to be very difficult for Connacht to complete the signing. Whether they can get out of it, it's hard to know. He's obviously signed, contracts have been signed, but it is a blow to their squad. He looked like a really exciting player. But I think in the wake of everything that happened last year, I'm not sure that they'll be able to go ahead and complete the deal. If they can get out of it, they possibly will. So and he's a 21-year-old player who, since the 5-year residency rule went up to 5, he looked like the profile of a player who might have been signed with the idea of him going on to play for Ireland in mind. So it's going to be certainly a blow to Connacht's chances this season, but I suppose they have to look at the bigger picture as well.
Eddie, on the Leinster front, ahead of their hosting of Munster this coming weekend, it looks like Rhys Ruddock is going to be missing. It looks like Jordan Larmour is going to be missing, but as we mentioned numerous times already on this segment, if anybody can cope with a couple of injuries, it's Leinster, and particularly given the form of the backline, despite that knock to the head laid on from Josh van der Fleer, he looked really, really impressive against Connacht at the weekend.
Yeah, I think Leinster's strength is obviously their depth, plus the fact that because of that depth, there's a lot of competition for places, and I think this is why Leinster last year were able to keep their foot on the gas right through the season, whether it was Pro 14 or Europe. even when their internationals weren't available, there's so much competition for spots that guys that pitch up have to play. Like, look at Josh van der Fleer. He knows that the guy's breathing down his neck in the back row, and all it takes is a couple of bad performances and he's not going to be back in there. And these are knock-on effects for fellas like him with the Irish team. So I think the competition element in Leinster keeps them really in the right place. It's a fantastic position to be in, to have that depth and that level of competition. I think that for a lot of it, that's what drives them on. And I think they can handle a few injuries, without too much of a fuss. They just have that sort of kind of strength in their squad. I suppose the one guy that they really want on the field all the time is Jonathan Sexton, and it was kind of surprising that he played in Galway. It was interesting because he almost certainly play against Munster, then he's going to play against Exeter, and then he's into the Autumn International. I thought maybe last Saturday he might have rested, but I think after last year, Leo was taking no chances and would have negotiated with Joe Schmidt that he wanted him in Galway. And it made sense, I suppose, as well, because we saw last year when they just got a little bit wrong in Galway, or they got caught. So I think Sexton's a guy that, that's really, without him, he's probably irreplaceable for them when it comes to crunch matters, particularly now with Carberry not being there as a backup.
I think 6 is the magic number here. I think it's a 6-day turnaround to the Wasps game after the Munster game, and if he was to play against Munster this weekend, then Exeter, then Toulouse, he'd play 6 in a row, and I'm not sure that's going to happen. I have a feeling that we're going to see a lot of rotation from Leinster this week. I'm not sure that we're going to see a lot of the players who played in Galway pitch up again against Munster at the weekend.
Are we thinking Ross Byrne starting at number 10 for Leinster?
I just can't see Johnny Sexton playing 6 games in a row. I just don't think that will be... I think that because of the turnaround, I think they'll almost have the 15 ready, prepping for Wasps. That they might, some of them might be on the bench. But even if you rotate their entire 15 last weekend, Leinster still have a team capable of being competitive against Munster, and they won in Thomond Park last year, having rested a load of players. So they have a lot of confidence in. Ross Byrne started semi-final against Munster last year when Sexton was fit the week after the Champions Cup final. I find it unrealistic. As Jeddy said, it was a real surprise to see him in that team for Galway. But then you think about the fact that there is that short turnaround. My suspicion would be that there's going to be a lot of rotation this week, and it's not necessarily going to be Joey against Johnny.
Would you go along with that, Eddie? Do you think we're going to see Sexton starting?
I think they're going to have to find some window of rest for him, but it tells a good story that Leinster are pitching up to play Munster in a full-on inter-pro, and they can afford to rest maybe some of their players, including Jonathan Sexton. We don't know if he will rest, but I think it's plausible he could be rested. But it just tells you where Leinster are in terms of the other provinces. And if you go back a few years, you wouldn't dream of resting players against Munster if you're Leinster playing in an pro. There'd be too much bragging rights at stake. But they've done it before. They went to Limerick last year and got the job done. And I think they will think their way through these next few weeks, because they have that sort of latitude now with the calibre of players to have that, and the competition is so good that anyone goes in there is going to pitch up. So I think, but it'll still be interesting for Ross Byrne to take on a full-blooded inter-pro in front of a big crowd. And Munster, like the one thing we do know about Munster is when they get into a bit of a corner, they'll come out swinging. And I think they'll come out swinging next week in Dublin, because were they to lose to Leinster, it'll be a miserable week for them to go to Exeter, which could be a place they could fall short again. So they will throw the kitchen sink at Leinster next week. And interpros, they are local derbies. That does change it a little bit. So I think Ross Byrne would certainly earn his spurs if he starts next week and he guides Leinster through.
Yes, it's certainly the ideal proving ground for him if you're going to start him on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't. I suppose the flip side of Johnny playing so many games is that Ross Byrne is probably a bit cold going into the proving. And if Sexton goes off for 10 minutes, he needs to be coming on. He's a player who's he finished last season third choice in the international pecking order. He started the Pro 14 semi-final, as I said earlier, and won the game. They trust him. They trusted him enough to risk losing Joey Carberry last season. They obviously think he is their number 2. I think there still is quite a big drop between himself and Sexton. But if you think they rested Henshaw last weekend, so he comes back in alongside him. You've got your international on one side, maybe bring in Gibson Park on the other side. You've got a decision maker. They just have so many options.
It's an embarrassment of riches, really.
It is, and it's why they every team uses more than 44 teams in this competition over the course of a season. They used 57 last year, and it's all about finishing top. and I put money on the finishing top again this year, despite the fact that they have to, that they have more internationals, which means they have to rest more players at all times. But their depth is phenomenal at the moment. It's actually probably their least deep position because of the Carberry departure. But as long as those two are fit, they're still in a pretty strong place.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it there. Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent, thanks so much for coming into us. And Eddie O'Sullivan as well, thanks so much for speaking to us again. More Monday Night Rugby at the same time next week.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball
with Air Sport. Watch every Munster and Leinster game only on the Air Sport pack. Visit airsport.ie.